We have before us some of the most vivid evidence yet that, Toto, we are not in Kansas anymore. In a normal primary contest, the leading candidates will be scrambling to inspire, to motivate, to uplift, sketching out a grand vision of the future and a play for voters' hearts and minds. But most signs indicate that the 2020 election is hardly a normal race for president. In this election, it appears that what Democratic voters seem to care about isn't all that normal campaign stuff. This year, Democrats seem to be coalescing around one goal and one goal only: to defeat Donald J. Trump. So what we have now is a frontrunner who's embracing that theory in spades. Exhibit A, Joe Biden's first paid ad out this morning in Iowa, underscoring this very bottom line.
We know in our bones this election is different. The stakes are higher, the threat more serious. We have to beat Donald Trump. And all the polls agree Joe Biden is the strongest Democrat to do the job.
Then there is Exhibit B, the candidate's wife, Dr. Jill Biden, in what might seem like a spontaneous marital moment, acknowledging the same concept yesterday.
You know, your candidate might be better on, I don't know, health care than Joe is. But you've got to look at who's going to win this election. And maybe you have to swallow a little bit and say, okay, I sort of personally like so-and-so better. But your bottom line has to be that we have to beat Trump.
And then today comes the evidence that the Biden campaign's unconventional strategy appears to be thriving in this unconventional primary race. A new poll out this morning shows the former vice president up a full 7 points since June, pulling way ahead of the rest of the Democratic field by double digits. Here to talk through all of this with us from the Washington Post, the esteemed national political reporter Robert Costa, and with me here at this table, the also esteemed Charlie Sykes, editor-in-chief of the conservative news and opinion website The Bulwark. Mara Gay, incredible New York Times editorial board member, and executive editor for Bloomberg Opinion, the one and only Tim O'Brien. All are MSNBC contributors. Thank you for being here, folks. Bob Costa, I start with you, master of the campaign trail. Are you surprised that Joe Biden campaigning openly, nakedly, saying with his wife, with him, both saying, hey, I may not be perfect, but I'm the guy to take on Donald Trump, that has worked and worked this well over this sustained period of time, despite all the mistakes he's made, despite a couple of mediocre debate performances, he's still up there on top and looking stronger than ever?
There's a belief inside of the Biden campaign, based on my conversations with top Democrats, that the younger voters that dominate the Democratic primary discussion on social media platforms don't always indicate what many of the older voters in the Democratic Party are seeking in a nominee, and that the core argument in places like South Carolina, a critical primary state, is beating President Trump in 2020, not necessarily having a candidate who's a champion for Medicare for all. And that core issue of electability, it may not be something that's generating tons of interest and enthusiasm for Vice President Biden, but as we've seen in previous Democratic races, sometimes being the seasoned hand is the best strategy moving ahead.
Well, Bob, you know what we also have seen in previous races is the kind of old saw of, you know, Democrats want to fall in love, Republicans fall in line. And here it looks much more like the opposite holds true, that you've got Democrats falling in line, despite the fact that Joe Biden is out of step in many ways with the Democratic nominating electorate on various issues. He's got, you know, trouble on various historical grounds, and he is not, you know, if you think about the rising coalition of the ascendant in the Democratic Party, he's not a great representative of that. We also see him citing polls, citing electability openly. Those are not normal ways for a candidate, especially a Democratic candidate, to run, especially this early in the race.
And there is a certain fear among some of Vice President Biden's allies that once fall begins and voters start to pay closer attention to past votes, like his vote for the 1994 crime bill, his vote for intervention in Iraq, do those issues start to haunt him in a new way once voters really start paying attention? For now, he's been able to escape a lot of scrutiny in the debates. He's been hit on those issues, but they haven't knocked him down. But it's only going to get more intense as candidates clamor to stay in this race and be part of the top tier.
Mara, I ask you if whether this intense focus on beating Donald Trump obviously is the defining feature of the Democratic electorate. It seems to me that Biden has been fortunate in one sense, which is that the sense of urgency about that has risen among a lot of Democratic voters over these last few weeks, given the way that Donald Trump has been behaving.
Well, for sure. I think there's a couple things going on. One thing to watch is whether Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and other candidates can erode Joe Biden's support among black voters. I tend to believe, just from covering politics now for years, that black voters in particular in the Democratic Party tend to be very skeptical and distrustful of the process for understandable reasons. And so it takes a little bit of time for them to get to know a candidate. Right. So in part, Joe Biden's support is based on support among black Democrats who just know him. They've seen him with Barack Obama, with the nation's first black president for 8 years. The other question is, when you have, I believe it's Bernie Sanders and Warren, both at about 14%, so you really actually do have a divided Democratic Party. It's just that the folks who aren't with Joe Biden haven't settled on a single candidate. So I think Democrats are truly divided about who is the best to beat Donald Trump. I think that older Democrats tend to believe that answer there is Joe Biden, but younger Democrats are not sold. It's not just that they think, well, I really want a candidate who's more liberal on this issue. I think there are a lot of younger Democrats who I talk to who truly don't believe that Joe Biden is any more electable than Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders or Kamala Harris or anyone else. So that's something that the party will have to sort out.
Right. Tim, I think there is an interesting question there, right? You think about the fact that Biden has run on electability in the way he has. It is the case, if you look at the head-to-head polling in a lot of polls over the course of the last few months, it's true that Bernie Sanders does beat Donald Trump in a lot of head-to-head polls. Elizabeth Warren beats Donald Trump in head-to-head polls. You get pretty down. You have to get down to the 5th or 6th position in the Democratic race before you start to find candidates that Trump is even up with. So how much of an advantage is being the most electable of 5 or 6 candidates who all seem pretty electable?
Yeah, it really worries me that they're throwing in on this as his chief selling point this early in the process. And remember, he pulled this out of his pocket after the second debate, in which he and Kamala Harris both fumbled healthcare questions. And the next day, Biden was with the press pack, and he said, you have to remember, I'm really electable. I think it's a bit of a sad commentary on what he's bringing to the table if they're focusing on this early. I think it's also worth remembering that Elizabeth Warren's ascent has been fueled by the fact that she's done her homework, that she's focused in on issues, she can talk in detail about these issues in a way that Biden can't. So I think it's really early for them to already be wrapping him in this mantle of he's electable. However, you also do see I thought in the polling where among older black voters, Biden is outstripping the entire field. And we know in 2016, black voters stayed at home. They didn't want to vote for Hillary, a significant cohort. Are they saying to themselves now, we're going to have a real politique approach to this? And we do see Biden as electable, even if he's not hitting us on the issues we care the most deeply about.
Charlie, I look at Joe Biden and I say to myself, is this Mitt Romney? And I ask you, as a Republican, whether you see some similarities to that again. And when I say that, what I mean is Mitt Romney in 2012 seemed like he was out of step with a lot of the conservative grassroots. A lot of people, where there were all these other challengers that were kind of flash in the pans, got hot for a month, got hot for 6 weeks. But in the end, despite all the things that people said, they said he was too liberal for the party. They said that he was just running on electability also. They said he was boring. He made a lot of mistakes. In the end, he sort of staggered through the process and ended up being the nominee in a relatively easy race. Yeah. Do you think there are parallels there?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good parallel. I was actually thinking before you mentioned that this feels a little bit like, though, 2016, when Donald Trump was ahead in the polls and everybody kept waiting for something to change, waiting for other candidates to coalesce against him, and it just never did. It was from day one. And I do think that Joe Biden has come up with a formula that is very, very appealing to the moment, which is this is not a normal campaign. And what he's saying is that this is not the time for the revolution. This is a time for return to normalcy. For those of you that are outraged, but also those of you who are just exhausted by Donald Trump, we can have this debate about the details, about the policies, but let's delay this until job one is done, which is getting rid of Donald Trump. And frankly, you'll notice that ad that he released today did not mention Iowa. That was a general election ad. Yeah. So he is immediately now casting himself not in contrast with the other Democrats, but saying, this is what I would look like. This is the message I would take to the country against Donald Trump. And I think the poll numbers would suggest that it's effective.
I want to throw up a couple of graphics here just to look a little bit deeper at this CNN poll. The first one here just talks about the movement over the course of these months since June. You have here Biden now at 29%. He's up 7 points. You have Sanders, who's up 1, Warren down 1, Pete up 1, and Kamala Harris now down 20. 12. Let me throw up the next set of polls here right after this. This one talks about moderate versus liberal, the ideological split in the party, where Biden, among liberals, Warren, Sanders, and Biden all basically at the same place here, 22, 22, 23. And then you look at the moderate vote, where Joe Biden with 34% is crushing the second next best two Democrats in Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. So, Costa, I ask you, you think about the breadth of this appeal here. It's be one thing if Joe Biden was the candidate of moderates and Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders were the candidate of the liberals or the left. You've got Joe Biden holding his own with the left of the party right now and then dominating in the moderate wing. If he can continue to do that, at least as you survey the ideological landscape of the Democratic Party, that is a pretty strong formula for victory, I would say.
The challenge for Senator Warren moving forward is to erode Vice President Biden's numbers among liberals. As long as a quarter of liberals in the Democratic Party are saying they're comfortable with Vice President Biden and a similar level comfortable with Senator Warren, then you're going to see challenges for Senator Sanders, Senator Warren, as they try to consolidate that left wing of the Democratic Party. And Senator Warren is gaining traction with many liberals, and you see her drawing big crowds in the early voting states. But until Vice President Biden is seen as not liberal enough by a significant amount of Democrats, he's going to hold steady in these polls.
And this goes back to, Mara, what you were talking about, I think, which is that, you think about there's an ideological question in the party, the left versus the center. Biden dominates the center, holds his own with the left. There's also an age thing, right? Older voters tend to dominate the Democratic primary that older have historically. Biden dominates with older voters, and he's holding his own with younger voters. He's not the top candidate, but he's doing okay there. So again, what could happen that with those two schisms, the generational schism and the ideological schism, what could happen to knock Joe Biden off of one element of that would open up a path in for someone else?
We have a long way to go. There's a long bit of runway, an exhausting one for both the candidates and Americans between now and the early primary states. And that gives a lot of opportunity for candidates like Sanders and Warren, and a lot of opportunity for big flubs for a candidate who's a front runner like Joe Biden. If you're the front runner, you're kind of taking the most flack as well from Donald Trump and others. So it can be really difficult, as I think we saw with Hillary Clinton. I also think that for younger voters, there's a little bit of trauma in 2016, certainly in general, but also just around this notion of, Hillary Clinton was seen as the safe candidate. Right. And at the end of the day, she didn't turn out the base. And I think that that's really on a lot of voters' minds. And there are a lot of people who are concerned that Joe Biden may not be able to pull that off, and it might be a repeat.
Charlie has a point of view.
If Donald Trump is on the ballot, I don't think the Democrats need anything else to motivate their voters to go out. I mean, that is the number one thing. There's two ways that Joe Biden loses this nomination. Number one is the flub that you mentioned. If there's some sort of an epic meltdown. Number two is the consolidation on the progressive wing. If in fact, the Bernie Sanders voters are added to the Elizabeth Warren voters. But see, that's why the poll numbers you just showed, John, are so interesting, because there is not a necessarily monolithic progressive opposition to Joe Biden. So I think the biggest threat is you add up those progressive voters, one of them drops out, there's a consolidation, and that doesn't look like it's going to happen.
And he puts Elizabeth Warren on his ticket.
Right.
I actually think the biggest threat is that the Democrats get so distracted about health care for all and Medicaid for all and all this, that they forget to do GOTV, that they forget to turn out their base, that they forget to show up and organize union Democrats and organize all the Democrats who are formerly convicted felons in Florida who are allowed to vote now, and that they don't do the hard work of organizing that Barack Obama did in 2008.
And rural voters. Talk about rural voters.
So here's the thing that Biden has done a lot in various ways over the course of the time that he's been running, was just to say nice things about Republicans. Charlie, you must feel good about this when he does these kind of things. We got some headlines here. This last weekend from The Hill, you got Biden saying there's an awful lot of really good Republicans out there. He said that this weekend at a fundraiser in Massachusetts. The New York Times has this headline: Biden thinks Trump is the problem, not all Republicans. Other Democrats disagree. And then this Fox News headline: Biden, Democrats may as well go home if they can't work with Republicans to find compromise. Now, this is, to me, one of the most controversial things. And it expresses a view of the world. It's at the heart of the mistake he made, the the worst gaffes so far. Praising the segregation centers. I could work with the worst of them. You know, the notion that Trump is a symptom, not a cause. And if you get rid of Donald Trump, there'll be a Republican Party that's maybe not what we believe, fellow Democrats, but is reasonable, is open to compromise. And there are a lot of Democrats out there who are like, dude, were you awake during the Obama administration?
That's right.
You're never going to work with Republicans, and this is nuts to think that you're going to be able to hold hands and sing Kumbaya with a bunch of Republicans when they're led by Mitch McConnell.
That's what I was about to say, was remember Barack Obama was singing Kumbaya before he entered the Oval Office, and they decided to rip his face off. I think any Democrat right now thinking in Mitch McConnell's world that he's suddenly going to turn around if Donald Trump leaves the White House and help push joint legislation through the Congress is lying to themselves. I think that we are in a deeply, deeply divided Congress. I think that's the reason the Republicans in the Senate right now and the Republicans in the House, for the most part, continue to support Trump. That may end, you know, particularly if the economy deteriorates any more from this point out. I think you'll see Republicans who feel beholden to Trump emboldened to depart from him. Right. But I think I am mystified by Joe Biden thinking it's a great talking point and a strength of his candidacy that he can work with Republicans.
Okay, I agree that it's naive to suggest that you're going to be able to work with Mitch McConnell. I get that. On the other hand, to basically say I'm willing to acknowledge that there are those of you that are Republicans that are not represented by Donald Trump, despite the poll numbers, leaves the door open a crack. But also, this is an important part.
But does he need to do that now?
Yeah, well, maybe a little bit later, because one of the big selling points of Joe Biden is that I can actually get things done. I can get legislation passed. And at some point, you're going to have to work with Republicans if, you know, no matter who controls the Senate, you're going to have to work across the party lines if you want to get legislation through. And again, I understand that this is not the moment we're in. It is awfully naive, but I don't think it's necessarily a gaffe.
Well, Bob, I want to ask Costa about this because, Bob, my perception of this is that this is not a mistake that Joe Biden's making. I mean a mistake in the sense that he's doing this intentionally. And the reason they're doing it is because they have polling that suggests that a lot of other campaigns have looked at too, which suggests that although there is a part of the Democratic Party that is fired up for total war with Republicans ad infinitum, ad nauseum, forever, that they have a lust for blood and teeth on the floor, that there forever and forever after, that there are a lot of Democrats, especially in that moderate centrist part of the party, and a lot of those who make up a big chunk of the Democratic nominating electorate, who still believe in the Barack Obama theory of the case, that somehow we can disagree without being disagreeable, that somehow there's got to be a way forward towards progress to help the common weal. And that's what the Biden people see in their polling, and that's what they're appealing to when he continues to make what is seen as a mistake by many people on the further leftward reaches of the party.
In the case the Biden people make to voters and in their strategy meetings is that it's not that he's running as a moderate. He's running to the left. On health care, he wants to add a public option to President Obama's health care law. He doesn't want Medicare for all. But a public option is still a move to the left. It's not left enough in the eyes of many Democrats. But they think by taking those kind of positions, they can bring enough liberals along and not scare off moderate Democrats and just make the case that he's not trying to run as a centrist. He's trying to run as an Obama-style, Obama-Biden-style Democrat.
Bob Costa, thank you for being here. You're always a huge contributor. I will say one last thing about this matter, just that relates to Joe Biden's mental acuity. There have been people who have raised questions about the gaffes he's made. My favorite quote of recent vintage, this one in Politico from Biden's brain surgeon from when he had that aneurysm, which went, "I'm going to vote for the candidate who I am absolutely certain has a brain that is functioning," and that narrows it down to exactly one, presumably referring there to Donald J. Trump.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.